to those who organised for our speakers to come this evening, and thank you to our speakers. We are I'm very pleased to welcome our speakers, although I won't be doing the bio so much. But we have two. I'm very pleased that we've got our two speakers. One from the European Biochar Industry Consortium, and one from Crisp Start, but also quite a history of it with biochar in New Zealand. So thank you very much for coming along, and I'm going to just pass to Trevor to do the bio before we get into the first presentation. So I'll pass to Trevor.
Thanks, Warwick. So I'm not going to read out their bios either because they've been circulated, but what I will say is that welcome to Nick. We nearly had him once before. We had our last our 2020 AGM all lined up in Wellington, in a very nice pub. Everything organised, and then of course COVID came along, and we had to cancel Nick and our other speaker, and we never got to find out what he was going to tell us. So 2 years has gone by. I'm sure him being an entrepreneur, he hasn't got the same talk prepared. It might have moved on a bit, one would think. So I will hand it over to Nick, and we will see what he has to tell us. Just to say, his background is Carbonscape was one of his interests a long time ago, which has some biochar links. That's probably where I first met up with Nick in connection with that near Nelson, and that's still ticking over and going in different directions, but certainly Nick has gone off in other directions as well. But I'll let him talk to what he's been up to and how it relates to our interest in biochar. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Yeah, and thank you all for the work you're doing, because it's actually really important. I figured that I'd actually just speak off some talking notes rather than do a presentation, because I sort of at least have the ability to sort of eyeball a number of the participants. So I thought I'd give you like a bit of a context about really where my thinking is, at the moment. And I guess prefacing that with the fact that I'm very focused on 2030. To me, that's the magic date. All the data are increasingly suggesting if we don't get radical reduction in emissions by 2030, then we're really risking a collapse scenario. And living in Picton and having just been through a period of experiencing 1 metre of rainfall within 3 or 4 days, and another $90 or $100 million worth of damage to the road on top of the $80 million worth of damage to the roads last year. To me, I think this reality is much more proximate than people really want to admit. So everything that I've been doing in the last while has really been focusing on trying to get to that 2030 target. And I guess, in a general sense, where I see this is that climate change is actually happening. It's happening right now. The data that I'm getting from around the world and various, conversations that I'm party to, it's basically happening twice as fast, and it's actually twice as bad as anyone's prepared to admit. And that means, as an entrepreneur, when you go into these things, if you really knew how hard it would be, you probably wouldn't do it. It's twice as difficult, but then of course it's actually twice as important that we actually do it. So ultimately everything evens out, and it's very, very important that we take action around these issues. My comments also are pretty much based on my experience in New Zealand, but with a global view. So what I try and do is get technologies across the line that actually can serve as a solution for the New Zealand market, but also obviously have the ability to be applied offshore as well. And I guess what I'm seeing generally is that the whole climate issue is just too big for the current political system. So I think, for me, certainly in my thinking and my action in the last few years has been really to try and rely less on government and more on networks around the world to sort of like generate the sort of change scenario. And that's really because I see that governments are pretty much choking on this issue. Climate change is a systems issue. Most countries in the world, particularly in the West, operate on sort of like a very siloed approach. So it's a miracle to get one agency to talk to another, let alone all of them working in the same direction. And so within that framework, I think it's also been impossible for the system itself, private sector or public sector, to actually place a value on the urgency, i.e. by value, I mean every year or every day that we defer actually has a pure net financial cost associated with it, because I think that is going to be really the tipping point to really start to get some action on this stuff. So everyone at the moment is like hoping that carbon, some form of ETS, emission trading schemes, are going to sort of like provide the platform for moving into this space. One of the interesting areas that I'm starting to see moving, and one which I've engaged with in a couple of things I'm doing at the moment, is actually the global voluntary carbon market. So whilst the value of the credits might be less, you can actually potentially start trading immediately. And so in terms of blowing some, I guess, power into an early stage proposition, then the voluntary carbon market is very interesting. A number of the banks in this area tend to be operating on a project basis. So, for example, South Pole, which is based in Zurich, is sort of one of the leaders in the voluntary global carbon market, and they tend to be banking projects on a project by project basis. The long run price that they have on carbon at the moment, it's $10 US. But there are some other interesting, I guess, new forms of credit that are emerging, which also play into this realm, and they're called resilience credits. And so a simple way of looking at it is that as many of the SDGs that you can tick, basically the value of those boxes that you tick go towards creating some sort of like aggregated credit. So I call them resilience credits, or call them impact credits. So for example, if you're operating in an area which also has ocean health benefits, or you're working with First Nations people, or other dimensions which are in the UN SDG framework, then that actually adds additional value to the credit. So I think that's one area where there is actually going to be a lot of movement. I think that New Zealand is very patchy in its understanding of really how quickly the world is moving on this. I had a call about this time last night with a senior official in an EU government who's a friend and colleague of mine, and I've been dealing with him for like the last 5 years, and he's basically exasperated. They're in a 500-year drought, and they've got a major energy issue coming down the pipeline as they head into winter. And so, I'm seeing a desperation being reflected in, I guess, offshore conversations that I don't see being reflected in onshore conversations in New Zealand. So the stuff that I've been trying to do is really what I would just call try and push the big buttons. We need to do everything. And I try and break things down into near, medium, long term, using sort of the McKinsey Horizon methodology. Most of my stuff is really more weighted towards, what are the buttons that I can press and try and provide some leadership on that are going to create biggest impact. So as Trevor indicated, we started Carbonscape 16 years ago, sort of like a semi-crazy idea in Marlborough. That got a lot of attention because our focus was specifically on biochar. I guess where I describe the company now is effectively we have succeeded in building a platform that can create various qualities of carbon. But as you're doing these things, you have to choose a vertical to start with, and the vertical that the company started with is making graphite out of biomass for use as an anode in lithium car batteries. And we have the largest lithium battery manufacturer in the world as an investor in the company now, and the largest anode manufacturer in the world as an investor in the company. The company is still based in Marlborough with a staff of about 14, but it has taken 16 years to achieve that, and heading down lots of pathways. So I guess the way that I see the carbon market at the moment is that it's pretty much, if you want to get something going from a business perspective, it's this classic, low volume, high value sort of scenario. But as you all know, biochar is actually a very interesting topic, and one of the areas that always gets me quite excited about it is the ability to program it as a delivery mechanism in and around soil health, and so performing a role a bit like a coral reef does, in the ocean, and the ability to use it to deliver the right profile of minerals and bacterial microbial activity into a particular soil type to sort of like create a 10x sort of improvement. So if I'm looking at the sector now, I think it's more important than ever, but it is reasonably high and dry in the sense that there is, at least in New Zealand, it's difficult to trade the carbon value associated with it. But I do believe that there are starting points in and around this when you start to look at its ability to sort of like be programmable and sort of, I guess, move into some sort of hybrid semi-fertilizer type of, delivery mechanism. What I would say is that doing this is really, really hard, but it's actually really, really important that we do it. You never quite know, when the market's going to change. And I think one of the other companies I've started recently, co-founded, is CH4. So we're focusing on methane inhibition through Asparaginopsis seaweed. And, it's going pretty well. But the thing that has surprised me, sort of like knocked me out of my chair with that company, is that I never ever anticipated to have as much full-on interest from the consumer side of the equation. And what I'm talking about are like supermarket chains. I'm talking about the largest supermarket chains in the world wanting low carbon produce because they know that their consumers want it right now. So one of the ideas, when Trevor sort of like provided a framework for me this evening was, trying to do something with biochar that actually links directly into a consumer product, a vegetable or whatever, to enable it to create, claim some sort of like low carbon benefit is a potential pathway. And I think, you'll be surprised at the level of uptake that you might get from some very large supermarket chains in and around that. I think that the ability of New Zealand in particular to move forward in this area is that we have to have, I guess I sort of like try and break the complexity down. The thing that the government's choking on is complexity, break it down to sort of like a regional view. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of Marlborough? What are the strengths and weaknesses of Canterbury, etc. Looking at soil types, looking at the profile of the industries which they have in operation there, and then sort of like layering solutions on top. So I think, more that I've gone into this, it has to be an and scenario. So it's not just biochar, it's biochar and methane inhibitors, it's biochar and solar energy, and it's biochar and food forests, etc. So really looking at it from a regional and from a community by community basis, I think is where I think we'd start with this. How it's all manifesting itself on a global basis, increasingly the whole low carbon thing is effectively becoming a new trade category. And so again, one of the things that I don't think that New Zealand fully appreciates at the moment is that low carbon quality or not is actually going to become a trade barrier. And I know from certain conversations around the trade agreement between New Zealand and the EU that New Zealand's poor performance in carbon was actually one of the sticking points that limited the ability of perhaps a better agreement to being achieved. So this is a trade issue. When it's a trade issue, it's sort of like it's a money issue. You don't even necessarily need to get into conversations with the science. So in some respects, the validation for New Zealand and for acting in New Zealand is actually coming from offshore. So if you talk to anyone in an EU country, low carbon produce is actually a key priority area, and generally it has a premium attached to it. And so the bit that New Zealand's missing, and the bit that New Zealand's choking on, is thinking that the fact that we have per capita, one of the highest CO2 loadings in the world, if we provide a solution to that and an ability to monetize that liability, we can actually flip that right over to a scenario where we can potentially be introducing $20 to $30 billion of new capital into the New Zealand economy every year on a repeatable basis. So the carbon issue is not, a net sort of liability to the economy. If we can provide solutions, we can flip it and actually turn it into, if you like, a mechanism for generating and adding additional revenue to the economy. So it's always this classic thing: where are the low-hanging fruit in this? As I said, I think that when you get to when you start talking about scaling some of these technologies, people engineers will always try and beat you under. I think the shift in value is going to be so extreme, and certainly in some of the other companies I'm involved with at the moment, I'm not too concerned about the economics, because the economics is going to come to play. Obviously, you don't want to have an LCA which is totally out of kilter, but I think at the early stage you don't need to be, doubling down and providing, full 5-year projections and stuff like that, because I think the price of carbon is going to go through the roof one way or the other. So yeah, I mean, I've seen a proliferation in farmers markets around New Zealand. I know there's increasing conversations about regenerative agriculture, new trials starting up and stuff like that. So I think, compared to when we started Carbonscape 16 years ago, and when there was like pretty much hardly anything happening. Now there are at least some new avenues where I think there is an ability to engage, and an ability to, have some conversations and potentially even get some small pilots underway. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions later on, or however you want to manage it, but I don't want to eat up all the time either.
Great, thanks, Nick. When BNNZ finally has strong enough to have a need of a few board positions, we'll be coming to tap you on your shoulder, I'm sure. We need some high-level advisors to help move things along at a policy level in New Zealand, I think. So thanks very much, and I'm sure there'll be some questions coming out of that at the end. We've got plenty of time at the end if people want to hang around, but just don't want to keep Donata hanging around for too long. And the introduction here is, our AGM was supposed to be some time ago, but bad organisation in our little world, we ended up drifting. And I had Harold Beer, the leader at the European Biochar Industry Consortium, lined up. But then we drifted and we drifted and we drifted into his holiday. So he managed to coerce Donata, or twist her arm, I'm not quite sure, but she's here today to present something that she's worked with with Harold, I think, and look forward to finding out more about what's going on in Europe. Over to you, Donata.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for having me today. I'm really excited about it. And yes, I work in the policy office of the European Biochar Industry Consortium. And with no further delay, I will share. So
someone needs to give.
Disabled.
Right. So
okay, I'll just change it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you should be able to do it now.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Do you see?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. So here we go. No, perfect. Okay, it's not working. Let's see. Let's try from here. Okay, and here. Okay, So I'll keep the part about what is biochar for you, because I think that's not the point here. So let's introduce the European Biochar Industry Consortium. This consortium was born in 2019 from the need of building this bridge between the industrial sector of biochar in the European context. Of course, the market, biochar market, and the European policy framework. So here we deal with some key activities that involve the field of policy. So we try to put some pressure into the European policy framework to finally see the European well represented in the in regulations and legislation. Then we have market intelligence. So we provide some relevant information to our members and also for publications. Then communication, because we know that how you communicate about biochar is essential. And industry standards, because we want really to underline that to reach all the benefits that biochar can provide, we need to stick with the high quality standards. In this case, we are talking about the European Biochar Certificate, and we will see about it like later. Here we have some of our members. So our membership is growing and growing, and now we are representing more than 65 members from 14 different countries. And let's start with some examples of application we can find in Europe. So of course, so far, agriculture is still the main application of biochar. But then we can see the evolving and developing sector, for example, of urban applications started from Sweden, and then the construction field. And here, like sort of a challenge we are facing. That's also great news, but it represents a challenge, of course. So all the scientific papers, 80% of all scientific papers on biochar are from the last 5 years, and that means that if you, for example, read a paper from 2014, it will be part just of the 5% of the knowledge we have. And that's challenging, because of course, if the policy framework, for example, of Europe is basing itself on literature and like relatively old literature, that will create some misunderstanding. And here, for example, you will find biochar meta-analysis. This is one of the bigger studies and global meta-analysis on biochar in agriculture. Then I will share the presentation with you. And here, some application benefits of biochar. So here we are talking specifically about all the benefits. In green, you will see like all the benefits, and in red, you will see some of negative effects. And here we have the albedo, for example. So talking about agriculture in Europe, we have great news. So biochar from the 16th of July of this year is included into the new regulation on fertilizing products. So it has been included in one of the categories of allowed input materials, specifically CMC 14, and the European Commission also provided a positive input list for biochar. So what is allowed in the regulation in order to in the regulation for producing biochar. And talking about allowed feedstock, sewage sludge and animal manure are not allowed by now. So while sewage sludge is clearly not allowed because of the concern about the pollutants inside of it, then we have an open discussion regarding animal manure. And that's why the European Biochar Industry Consortium published a position paper on sewage sludge and about how pyrolysis can allow to remove a variety of pollutants. And here I wanted to provide an example of the use of biochar, alternative use. I mean, here animal manure is not used as feedstock, but in this project at the Mundenhof Animal Nature Adventure Park that EBI is following, they were able to use the residues of this natural park to produce biochar, and then to mix animal manure with biochar, providing really great effects on the field in which animals live. And if you want to check it out, it's in German, and so unfortunately it's in German, but with some translation, it's nice. And then we switch to a different application. So this is the urban application. It's been developed in Stockholm, and it involved tree beds in which they added biochar to really build up the resilience of trees that in urban environments are usually their ecosystem services are really low, caused by the poor space for their roots and storm water, so water runoff and pollutants. And biochar really here can act as a very good agent to ameliorate their life. And also we can see the developing field of urban application of biochar in stormwater management and biofiltering. Here we can say an example of biochar used in an urban environment. So it can really enhance the health of plants and create community spaces and social spaces. And here it's the example of Rosenlund Parken, an inner yard with biochar macadam. And then we can go to application of biochar in construction and materials. So this is a huge, it has a huge potential, this application, as the construction field right now causes 8%. The cement field causes 8% of emissions right now. So it's promising trying to build these new materials with biochar. So the aim is to finally produce a CO2 negative concrete. Here in this case we have the use of biochar as a filler, but here, for example, we have biochar used, like they were able to substitute 15% and like to put inside 15% of biochar. And here, like the trials show that biochar allowed to really enhance the features of the cement. So that should be really the aim of using biochar, just not only reduce the emissions and create a carbon negative concrete, but also to enhance the features of something like that. And also you can find the biochar application in asphalt. Also here is this is as well a developing application. And here we have a facade announced from Audi and also this company called Made of Air. And here we can see a facade made with biochar. And here we see some other, for example, polymers with biochar. So this is by Novocarbo. They used specifically this shape of pots because they are really thin, and they wanted to show how a hard manufacture can be reached and realized with the use of biochar. And here we see other examples of the use of biochar in materials. And we have, for example, 3D printing or the mixing of biochar and wood. And now we go to the biochar manufacturing equipment that we can find in Europe. So here we have some examples. And yeah, we go from gasification to normal pyrolysis to electronical pyrolysis. And our members are developing these technologies, these plans. Here you can have some examples. And here, for example, here we have this next level scaling. This is in Switzerland. This is a very huge plant, so it can produce 3,500 tons of biochar per year, sequestering 9,000 tons of CO2. And then the heat here is used as renewable energy to this sugar plant near the biochar plant. And I wanted also to provide some insights about the market growth of biochar in the European context. So the biochar production capacity is experiencing a very strong growth, as well as the number of plants in Europe is rising very rapidly. So the growth rate of 2021 was 71%, but the growth rate of 2022 is expected to be 85%. And here you can see some average growth rate. And yeah, this can lead, like for example, in 2021 we had the capacity of production that was around 40,000 tons of biochar, and 20,000 were produced. So this year, these growth rates can lead to almost 40,000 tons of biochar. And this is equivalent to sequestering 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. So this really makes biochar by far the most relevant industrial net today. And this is not because the other negative emission technologies are not as good as biochar, but here the technology readiness level is really high. So we are ready for this. We are ready for this sequestration, and it is happening. So that's why right now, and probably for the next decade, biochar will be the most relevant industrial negative emission technology. And some insights also about carbon markets. So here we come to what I said at the beginning. So this is the European Biochar Certificate, and it was born to assure a high quality of biochar, and it is essential to, again, about communication, to gain the trust of the public, to gain the trust of people using biochar. And here you will find all the EBC classes. From 2020, it goes with the EBC Sync, because we started to stress, of course, also about the climate service that biochar can provide. And here you will find also some limit values according to the different categories of European Biochar Certificate. Also, I wanted to mention carbon future and carbon removal value. Yeah, so carbon future is providing this carbon removal, carbon sinks, and it's really a key driver for further market growth. Then lastly, I wanted to stress another time on the climate relevance that can have biochar, because we really have to look at the whole picture, so all the benefits that biochar can provide. And yes, so we have the variety of application, we have the benefits on soil and in the agronomic sector for animal feeding, we have the use in materials, and we have this climate relevance. So the 2022 growth rate, as I said before, is 85%. And continuing for 4 more years, we will be able to remove 1 megaton by 2026 in Europe alone. Then, if the rates keep like this till 2030, we will sequester 10 megatons of carbon in Europe. So 2 times what the Commission is current, like their aim for the industrial things. So this is 2 times what the Commissions wanted to reach from the industrial things. And yeah, this could lead really, if the rates are like this, EBI target is of sequestering 255 megatons by 2036. Then after this year, yeah, we suppose the growth rate will slow a little bit, because the biomass availability will not allow a growth rate like this. And here some I wanted to conclude with some synergies of biochar with the EU policy framework. So here we think that biochar could really influence all these policy framework. And yeah, so this is the end of my presentation.
Great.
I hope it was somehow
No, that was
a
excellent.
good overview.
Thank you. So we've got as much time probably as people and our speakers want for talking. I know it's probably going to get late in New Zealand, so we'll probably open it up for questions to either of them. But I might hand this back to Warwick to manage the discussion.
Yes, please. So firstly, thank you so much for coming along and speaking to us, both Nick and Donata, and also Thomas at the bottom supporting. Thanks for coming along. So if people have questions, could you please put them in the chat, and then we can go through them. And while people are getting that ready, I might just introduce one of my own questions. And Donata, since you've just been speaking, I'm very curious about whether the current drought in Europe has had any impact on the appetite for biochar, and whether people are talking about it more and linking it to the drought in a way of sort of helping reverse that.
Yeah, sorry, can you repeat, because I have some problems with the audio and.
Okay. I asked, with the drought in Europe at the moment, has that changed how interested or keen people are to invest in biochar and use it in their land and that sort of thing? Is that something that you see, or has there been much of a change?
Okay, so if the investment on biochar is changing?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so yes, I think like it goes also with the growing interest in carbon removals, I think. So the more people are aware of carbon removal, and for example, the market of carbon removal is now really under all eyes. I think biochar as well is experiencing a very dynamic growth in investments. So we have so many people with companies that start to have interest in biochar, and they write us from also like out of Europe to know about it. So I think with the industrial sector growing, also people are starting to be aware about it and starting to think about investing on it. And I don't know if Thomas, if you want to elaborate more on this.
Maybe just a quick addition. Hello and welcome from my side. Great presentation, Donata. The thing in Europe was that biochar was not really included in several regulations. So if you wanted to use biochar in the agricultural sector, it was a very difficult path to go. It was sometimes a gray area, and right now it is clear that you can use it, and it makes it a more serious thing, because before sometimes it was, we are not sure about biochar, we heard bad things, we heard good things, to be sure we don't use it. And now it really made it serious, and it's now up to the resellers, it's up to the producers to share this information and to make the market bigger. I think that's still to come, because it just went into the force in July, but I'm 100% sure that the inclusion of biochar in this regulation was a real major step for the market development.
Still I feel we feel that biochar is underrepresented in all Europe policy framework, because right now is starting to be included. So it's now included into for agricultural use, but right now, for example, we have a very this very fast developing, for example, sector for materials, and no one talk about it. So it's always a little bit backward from the state of the art of biochar. Other than that, I feel it's really growing, and we have great results. So
awesome, thank you. And a question for Nick. So what percentage of the lithium battery market is presently served by biographite, and how much scaling up will be required to replace the the question is bad versions, but the other versions?
So the reality is a huge amount is required. So what I've learned is that in the average lithium battery, about 20 to 30% of the battery is actually graphite. So what we've done at Carbonscape is we are the only company in the world that can take any biomass and turn it into graphite that actually outperforms the best synthetic graphite on the market. So this is sort of as simple as taking vine prunings from Marlborough or slash from forestry and turning them into graphite, which I think the current market price is about $10,000 a ton. So what we've done at the company is actually create, if you like, a series of recipes that program back into the particular type of biomass to get the same output. So to answer the question, there's no real competition to our company at this point. The other competitors is basically direct fossil graphite, which is mined out of the ground. And obviously that has inconsistent quality associated with it. Then you have synthetic, what they're calling synthetic graphite, which is sort of refining fossil graphite and taking it up a level. But again, all of those really require the original fossil feedstock. So the size of the market is massive. The model that we're going to is going to basically license it on a global basis, so we can actually grow the impact of our green graphite exponentially. And so that's why it's been a pretty major victory for a small New Zealand company to have secured direct investment from the two largest companies in the world that really define this sector.
Fantastic. Possibly an augmentation to the question is there a way to produce biographite in a portable or modular unit so it can be set up on a site near excess biomass? If it's commercially confidential, obviously you don't have to answer that.
No, it's fine. I mean, the whole idea is modular. I mean, what I've learned when you go into clean tech development, you put all your effort into creating the technologies, and I think the technology is about a third of the equation. Another third of the equation is actually accessing the feedstocks, whatever they may be, and then the other third is transportation. So actually, there's a very strong impetus to develop technologies which, if you like, I use the modular unitized sort of like view where you can site these as close as possible to the biomass supply, so you're not trucking, and freighting a whole lot of stuff unnecessarily. Yep.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, back to Donata. So this question, firstly very encouraged by the news about the growth in biochar, and the ramp up is quite impressive. So at what stage does the available supply of feedstock start to limit production of biochar? And a supplementary question to that, are there plans to start farming to produce biochar? And also, I've got another one after that, but maybe we'll,
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, talking about the rate we presented. So of course, one essential barrier for this is the biomass availability. But we really want to stress that the right way, the most right way and sustainable way of producing biochar is using residues. So the stage when we start to have problem with feedstock is when we will have it's at the stage we finish the residues. So we really, and we don't want to promote for example, the competition between, for example, agriculture for food and agriculture for biochar. It should not be like this. It should yeah, the fact would be using really our residues to produce biochar. Of course, if the technologies, for example, for recovering nutrients is developing, then you can use all the sewage sludge, for example, food. So it depends as well on the technologies, on the incentives we receive, on the market growing, on other technologies maybe coming out. But talking about feedstock, it's really about the amount of residues we have and we will have, and we are a lot on this planet. So I think we will have we will have a lot for quite a time. But Thomas, do you want to add something?
I think that was a great explanation. And as you said, or in Europe, we have a lot of different technologies, and the technologies have a very high readiness level. And we can use a lot of variety of feedstock. And I think at some point, but that would be a major challenge globally, I think we have to talk about a management plan for biomass for all, or at least a carbon management plan. But that has to be implemented on a politician or on a politician level, because it's a very important topic. And then we have to decide what is the most way to prioritize. And what we don't see, because it was also a question, is that we have right now a competition about where will this biomass go, because we use residues which is not normally used for other plants.
So perhaps to augment extra question on that previous one, how developed is the conversation around biomass to energy versus biomass to biomaterials and chemicals versus biomass to biochar, and you know what's happening in the political or sort of in the spaces there for managing that biomass?
Thomas,
maybe I jump in. If you use, for example, we have a technology provider, if you use forest residues, and we really talk about the residues, which are normally just left in the forest, and sometimes you get some problems if the residues are left in the forests. He can produce out of that feedstock electricity, thermal power, and biochar. So you have one feedstock, you have a residue as feedstock, and you can produce 3 different kind of products. And if you just have a look at it from an economical side, it's a very nice way to go. And so the people are looking to this topic, and there is not the competition of producing biochar and energy, because we are producing biochar and energy. If you don't you produce electricity and you want to have a higher output of biochar, for sure, then you will lower the energy outcome, but still you have one. And we see the development that municipalities are installing plants to produce heat for the households or to produce heat for hospitals, and using biochar in their urban area. And I think that's a real great example for circular economy. They're using their landscape residues to feed this plant, and that's really great. And that's why I see the development that the people who are running right now just biomass plants to produce heat, they are already think about and switch to pyrolysis and gasifications just because of the variety of products they have, and it's more economical right now.
That's very good news, and I'd like to talk with you at more depth about that, because in New Zealand, like Nick was saying, it's very one-sided. It's biomass to energy plus chemicals a little bit. Trevor, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to expand on that a little bit because I sat through a Scion webinar recently, which was from the chair of the biomass energy organization, either the international or the European one, and there seemed to be a huge disconnect from these big international organizations that are dealing with biomass. They don't seem to be even aware of this biochar push at the moment. So I'm a bit worried about the engagement. And I put that question to Harold and to Tom Miles and to Kathleen Draper, but I haven't had a reply yet. But there doesn't seem to be any engagement between the big biochar organizations and the very big biomass and energy organizations around the world. There seems to be a disconnect there still for me.
Mm-hmm.
May I also jump in? I think one reason is the development of the biochar sector was very fast. So the EBI started in 2019 and we are now 65 members, but still 65 members is nothing compared with the huge industry of bioenergy within Europe, because they have a lot of members there. It's a very old traditional industry and they have a lot of power. And for sure they do not, or at least because on some point we are competitors, because sometimes you use similar feedstock, and on some points we fight together, because also the usage of biomass, it's not always that the people like it very much in Europe, because there is always the discussion about the competition for producing food or producing biomass, or what should we do. And I think one strategy would be just to not consider it, because if you don't talk about it, you don't promote it. But what we do is we try to connect with them and get a better positioning. The problem what we also face is we grow organically. So we do not, as an industry association, we don't have venture capital to make us already big in the beginning. So since last year, Harold almost managed the whole industry consortium by himself. And right now I and Donata support him, but still we are 2 less people. And that's also why we need much more members actually. More members needs more voice on the political side. And it means more financial power for us to do more work. And it also means that we are getting much more serious to talk on a level on the same height, because if we are just a little small thing, then for sure they just ignore us. So that's also, if someone wants to join us, you're very welcome to join us, to join the forces and get bigger and faster.
Bigger and faster with biochar sounds good, as long as the LCA works. Nick, I saw you nodding your head a lot. Do you have a comment there?
No, I think it's just very interesting to see, Europe in its typical fashion is actually meticulously, unfurling a roadmap around the opportunity, whereas in New Zealand it's sort of like very patchy, and there isn't really the intention, which sort of makes me sad, because I know that in New Zealand there is a lot of biomass around the place, whether it's sitting on a beach in Tolaga Bay that's been washed down by a flood, or whether it's prunings from the wine industry in Marlborough, So I think it's an interesting question to consider, how New Zealand could engage directly around the pathway that's been established. So rather than having to do all the hard work, a lot of the hard work's been done. It's the interesting question, I think, is how can New Zealand apply the work that's been done in Europe to give us a bit of a head start on it.
Yep, let's not reinvent the wheel over here. And thanks, John. So we've got another couple of questions about feedstock. So in Europe, what is the most common feedstock and method of production, if there is a most common, or is it very bespoke to the area and region which it is being produced, which the biochar is being produced in?
So as I hope I'm not wrong, and Thomas, correct me if it's not right. I think that right now the most common feedstock is still like wood chip and branches and wood. And then the most common plant would be a pyrolysis plant, and the 80% of now the 60% now is around is from 500 to 2,000 tons of biochar per year. So this is the common production, and we have above 80% are medium plants. So the 80% of them medium plants and above. So that's the then if I also read here, can biochar be used to capture nutrients in wastewater as well and in animal manures? So here there are some uses as biofilter and to capture nutrients, but we need more scientific sound basis here. So yes, you can find some references, for example, in biochar emerging applications. This is a new manual that came out from the Polito, so the Politecnico of Turin, and this is a very nice way to find out about the new applications of biochar. Still, these are new applications, so I cannot tell this is for sure a biochar promising use, for example, but there are some uses. There are some applications have been tried.
Great. A question again is there a negative, or has there been negative reactions from locals, potentially also environmentalists, against pyrolysis in Europe? And do these, is there much public resistance, and when they want to set up in the different communities? Is that something that you have visibility of?
So yes, more than about pyrolysis, I feel it's directly on biochar. So we still are experiencing this untrust about biochar, and for example from farmers, and that's why the communication need to be enhanced, because somehow the industrial sector is really aware of what's going on, but not people. And there is a lot of concerns about pollutants in biochars. For example, when you talk about the pyrolysis of sewage sludge, that's they are arguing that there will be microplastics and PFAS and PAHs. But yeah, pyrolysis itself is not really well known. It's not enough well known, because otherwise they will realize it is able to, for example, remove these pollutants. So yeah, I feel more about biochar in general than pyrolysis. Then of course, like, you have to have a very good standard for pyrolysis. Again, not everything you burn is biochar. So as well as for the feedstock, you need a very good process with certain standards. So with a certain temperature, with certain residence time. So that's why. So sometimes there is this misconception about what pyrolysis for producing biochar is, and that could be a problem, for example, for the environmental sector.
Maybe Yeah, maybe I add it's like as also Donata mentioned during the presentation, there is a lack of knowledge, because when the topic of biochar came up, there was not really there were no quality standards about biochar. Some biochars were very bad, or even they were just waste. They have not been biochar, but the people called them biochar. And then there were some analysis, and they saw, all right, that's waste. And the topic of biochar was, all right, it's here, but it's not good. And also in the beginning of the usage of biochar, they used the biochar just spreading it on the fields. And today we know that the best, or the better way is to mix it with manure, or to do composting, and those things are necessary to do to get the best results. But still, there was the topic came up early, and they saw some negative effects, and so they have concerns about it. And today it's much more difficult, when the concerns have already been here, to get rid of them again. But we are also having some countries like Denmark, they don't have any experiences with biochar, and so they are much more open to that topic. And so Denmark, for example, we can use their now biochar we can use their sewage sludge to produce biochar, and because they are just looking at the state of the art of how to produce biochar, and that's actually very nice. And so sometimes you have a bit the problem. Also, to be honest, it's we implemented the framework PICS, so for pyrogenic carbon capturing and storage, that the people get to know it's a carbon capture technology, because normally we hear, if you talk about carbon capture and carbon sequestration, we just talk about bioenergy, carbon capturing and storage, and direct air capturing. And but a lot of environmental lists have some problems with PICS actually, because or with CCS at all in general. And they are fighting against CCS because they say it's not the right way how to deal with the climate crisis. And as I was also in a lot of climate initiative, I would have said the same thing 3 years ago. But today I have to consider the facts and the informations which are state of the art, and I have to say it is necessary, and we do have to implement it. And we have to get ready to scale, and we are ready to scale, but now we have to scale. That's not a point of discussion anymore. But still, all the informations are available, all the informations are widespread, and we have to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's that old diffusion of innovation, isn't it? So there's one last one from Dale, and then I'll ask a question to both Nick, Donata, and Thomas. So this last one from Dale. Is anybody producing biochar from paper waste? Is that sort of commercial scale at the moment?
Not that I,
Yes.
Thomas? Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I think so. There is one guy in Austria who's producing biochar from paper waste, as far as I know.
Okay. Would you mind mentioning him, just so Dale has someone to Google? Or should he just
sure,
get in contact
we can
with you?
share contact informations, and then I can get him in contact.
Okay, awesome. And then the last one. So we met with some government officials last year. So we call them our Ministry for Primary Industries, but we also have a government body looking at climate, as well as other related aspects of our economy. So we did a bit of math there, and we worked out that based off New Zealand's residues, we could create about 240,000 tons of biochar from readily accessible residues, which leads to essentially, that was 400,000, which is megaton scale on an annual basis. What advice would you give to people looking to develop that, people in this Zoom room, as well as people in our networks? What are the keys to enabling that, and what kind of people do we need to become to enable that?
Yeah, well, I start, as I told, I start with the right communication, the right raise of awareness. And of course, when you produce biochar, you need also to know how to apply it, because one thing is producing it, one thing is assuring that this biochar, for example, is not burned, so that the CO2 is not re-emitted, for example. So one thing would be really trying to do this properly with a sustainable basis. So always looking into this wide range of benefits that biochar can provide, not just look into a single one. That would be my my initial suggestion, and then I think Thomas has other things to say.
Good communication is always good. Maybe some of you know John P. Cotter, Leading Change. That's a very interesting book, I think, in my opinion, to start some project anywhere. And he states a few things how you can make something change in a company, for example. But I think one important point is to build a strong project consortium. That means finding people who are dealing with the residues, finding people who want to have renewable energy, finding people who want to apply biochar. So that's really probably a main part to build a strong consortium about it. And another thing is really to focus, I would really say focus on the positive things, because as we see a lot of people in our bubble, I would say, I also have a background from environmental and process engineering, and it was new to me that I should not share all the time the negative facts about climate change, because I thought in the beginning that's the main reason why people will choose sustainable technologies. But at the end, you have to come with all the benefits you have, and the benefits are for sure using residues, producing local energy, providing local energy for the people, also put the benefits for the people in the front. I think that's always a very interesting point of view. And for sure, you have to build a real business case. And my advice would be also to see already or to already develop all the paths where all the products go to, because that's what we sometimes saw, that the people here were so enthusiastic, and we had a lot of venture capitals, and the people made some projects, but they did not have a real business plan how to deal with their products. So they produced energy, for example, they could sell it, but still they have to enter the market with the biochar, and they did not do it before, and that was a problem some people faced. So really try to already build a good consortium with a few different stakeholders, do positive communication, and try to put that in front.
Awesome. Thanks, Thomas. Yeah.
From my perspective, I think it's all about carbon. So the first question that I would ask in a New Zealand scenario is, are you prepared to wait for, I don't know, another 7 years until New Zealand perhaps ends up with an emission trading scheme that actually works? Or are you prepared to jump into the voluntary carbon market now and start to leverage, $10 US a ton of forward value? I think also in the New Zealand scenario, and that's because it's hard here and we're a small country, that we tend to do things that are incremental. I think in this situation here, where there is, the potential to get effectively off the shelf, technology to actually create the biochar, that this is an opportunity that which, you could look at doing from scale from the get-go with the right partners. The right liquidity around carbon gives you the right optionality to potentially give it away to farmers, or undercut the fertilizer companies, or even just bank the carbon and sit on it for the future. So that's another securitization sort of like model that sits there. And then obviously you do have the the various byproducts that come from it. But from my perspective anyway, I think what the world needs is liquidity around carbon, and as quickly as possible and at massive scale. So to me, that's where the game is.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much to Nick, Donata, and Thomas for giving up of your time today, and also to all of our BNNZ members and guests for coming along this evening. I've learned a lot. I have enjoyed this, and yeah, this has been yeah, really good. So thank you also to the committee members who helped put this together, especially Trevor for setting up the speakers and being generous with the network that you've been building and fostering over this time. Yeah, so thank you everyone for coming along. Just before we finish up, we are the Biochar Network New Zealand. You can find us at www.biochar.net.nz, but I'm assuming that most of you already know that. But Nick, how can we find you, and what would, you know, if you'd like to be contacted?
I mean, it's pretty easy, Nick, N-I-C-K @chrisstart.com. So if you Google me, you'll find me. I'm happy to receive any emails from anyone. So
awesome. And Donata and Thomas, where can we find you?
So you can find the biochar, our European biochar industry on our webpage. So as well, if you Google it, you will find it, and you can write us to our mail. So info@biocharindustry.com, and yeah, you will find us there. You will find some interesting publications, and yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
And also maybe a small addition on LinkedIn for sure. There we all will also share some news and things.
Very cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming along and sharing of your time. This has been great, and I really look forward to getting in contact with each of you and helping you build your networks and yeah, taking biochar to the moon, but not really, because space travel is not sustainable.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We need it here.
yeah, leave it here in the ground or in other useful spaces. So yeah,
Make it on Mars.
Yes, if you've got a massive excess of energy. Yeah, so thank you everyone. I suppose, close the formalities of the meeting, but if people are happy to hang around and